My name is Paul Zydel, and I was a post-production mixer for 31 years and then changed my career to props, which I've been doing for 10 years now. I worked on over 200 feature films. A lot of ADR is done in pieces, so the actor happens to be in New York, so you'll do a couple of scenes with them, something like that. But overall, I'd say well over 200 feature credits. I also have a lot of television credits. Go back to Kojak and The Nurse and those 70s cop shows, you know. We did work on NYPD Blue. I did all the Sopranos, all the Sex and the City. I gotta say my job was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Once I got the hang of putting up with the nerve-wracking hardcore directors and the process itself, it's very nerve-wracking. It's like playing a piano in front of a live audience. You have to nail it on the first take because there is no second. When you make the mistake, it's very obvious. So you try to hone your craft so you don't make mistakes. And I was very fortunate to find that niche, and it's a good memory, I gotta say. I really enjoyed it. In 1983, I had the most involved project that I've ever worked on in terms of one film, and that was Once Upon a Time in America. In those days, the Italian filmmakers did not shoot sync sound, or they didn't really care about sound, so you had to ADR or loop every line in the movie. So every actor, from Robert De Niro on down to the most minute waiter in the background, you know, saying, "What would you like, sir?" had to be looped. So we not only looped the principal actors as adults, we did them as children because the film goes back and forth from their youth to their adulthood and how they became gangsters. And we did a lot of background in Yiddish and Hebrew as well, because it was the Jewish Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I learned a lot about the Yiddish language, you know. And there was also Italian in the film. It was quite an interesting project, you know. I worked with Sergio Leone, but it was an interesting experience in itself because he didn't speak English. And there was an interpreter, Brian Frailino, I remember his name, who was, he was sort of the associate producer and translator, and he was an actor as well, and he was able to interpret what Sergio was asking for in the terms of direction for each actor. They rehearse the lines, they get the emotional charge, the juices going, and some actors were really good at it, you know, and they could just get right back into it. Donald Sutherland was one that I really liked working with because even if you had an enormous amount of looping to do, he could nail it. And he was very good at lip sync because when he was a young actor, he did a lot of foreign dubbing pictures into English from French in Canada. So he was good. And then, you know, there were the hard cases, and a guy like James Gandolfini, I did all the Sopranos series, and Jim was, once you got to know him, you loved him. But in the beginning, it was a little rough. You know, he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to loop. He thought it was BS, you know. And by the end of season 1, we had him. And, you know, it became an enjoyable process. I was working on Quick Change, and Bill Murray loved the way I was able to punch in. And he called me Paulie the Finger for the whole duration of and he put a sign on my chest. And everybody had a nickname, and that was mine for the show. I actually developed a big callus on my punch-in finger from so many years of tapping the console and, you know, punching in on a quick breath or a hiccup, you know. And that's all changed now because all the punch-ins are automated, so you can put a time code entry point in and punch in on a micron. But, you know, I had to learn it the hard way to listen to and learn the dialogue and know when to make a punch-in.
Which finger was that?
It was the middle. It was that one. And the only guy I had a lot of problems with that way was Mike Nichols, because he asked for the impossible. He wanted really complicated playbacks, a line from this, a word from that, a breath from this, and I had 24 playback tracks, and I was all over the place. It was like a one-armed paper hanger trying to keep ahead of him, you know, and he would comment on every mistake. And you know, if you didn't know the dialogue, you had to memorize it. Once you've had it, you had it. But in the beginning, the first couple of passes, you know, he was playing back stuff that was done in other sessions. So I didn't know. I had no written cue sheets. I had to learn it. And, you know, you have to memorize quick. You have to be pretty quick on your feet. And some of these directors are not the most pleasant thing to work with either. Some of them can be a little nasty. They're under a lot of pressure, and I get it, so you forgive them. So you can talk about them after they leave. Okay, the most fearsome director I ever had the pleasure of working with was William Friedkin, who did The Exorcist. I did a movie called Cruising with him, and then I did Rules of Engagement and part of The Sorcerer. And to quote another mixer, when Billy Friedkin walked in the room, all the anuses pucker. So you could take that to the bank, because he demanded absolute perfection. You could not make a mistake, and he had a habit. If you made a mistake, he would be in the other room. He would be in the studio. He wouldn't sit in the control room most of the time. He'd bang on the window and go honk and hold his finger up. And you got 2 honks. The third one, you got yelled at. And the problem I had was he liked me. So like when Billy was in town, Paul got the job, and I'm thinking like, oh God, here we go again. I don't need this kind of day. But I got through it with him, and he's actually another brilliant guy who he sort of disappeared now. You don't hear much about him, but he did some wonderful films. I was working on Speed 2 with Willem Dafoe, and he came in. He was a very nice fellow, and he had a paper bag with him, and he asked that I put the studio lights down while we were working. And he kept putting his nose into the paper bag. And I'm thinking this is some kind of drug thing or something. I had no idea. He did his work, he was fine. And we broke for lunch, and my recorder said, I gotta find out what's in that bag. And it turned out to be a pair of panties. Then Eric Roberts, he had me change the room around because he couldn't loop from the right side of the room. So I had to move the editor's desk, move the microphone, and I had a standing wave in that studio on the left side of the room, so I really didn't want to put the mic where I had a standing wave. A standing wave is just a vibration that the microphone picks up and gets in your way, and you're trying to create good sound. You don't want to replace bad sound with bad sound, so that was another weird one. That was pretty weird. In 2005, the company I was working for, which was Todd A.O. Studios, who had been in business over 50 years, and they had a bunch of Academy Awards, and the company got sold to Liberty Media, and Liberty Media proceeded to close all the studios that they bought and sell the real estate, because they wanted to put it all together into one package. And they wound up closing us, so I had no job. And I was 57 years old and had a sick wife that I had to take care of, and I needed a job that paid close to what I was making. So I'm pretty good with my hands, and I changed my career to prop, and became a set dresser and prop guy. And I figured I'm close enough to retirement to ride it out. The other option was to move to Los Angeles, because Todd A.O. offered me a seat there in the studio. But it was a good choice that I didn't go, because they completely closed 2 years later, when they're totally out of business now. So I would have been out of work 2 years later and older, and my wife passed away. So it was a good choice I made. And now I get to work, as my niece calls it, the dark side of filmmaking, where you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and have to be on a stage at 6 and work a 12-hour day with your hands. I had a 52 card, and just because I was in post didn't mean I didn't know how a film was made, because I had to deal with taking it apart on the backside. So I knew how a camera worked, and I knew how the editing process worked, and I knew how the camera had to turn to reverse a cut and all this. And it was very easy for me to get into it. It was just the physicality of it that was different, and how to hang pictures so 10 of them are in an exact plane, spaced evenly apart, and learn that kind of thing. But as far as the mechanics of filmmaking, I knew that, so that wasn't too hard. And I had a 52 card, so I knew a lot of people, so I was able to adapt. The first 2 years was rough because I was older, and then when you get to work with each crew, you get to know them and they know you, and you work more and more. I've done lead man on a few jobs. I'm now working on Project Runway, which is my 3rd season as a lead man, so I fell into it pretty easily. And as I say, it was a good thing to do, because I carried my insurance, and with mixing and post-production, There are even fewer jobs now than there were when I got out, and this is only 10 years later. The film business now is not as easy to break into. The competition is very tight. They demand more of you in less time. So you have to really learn your craft as fast as you can and as well as you can, and stay off the cell phones, because part of what I see on all the sets now is everybody's got a cell phone in their hand, and you can't be doing your job properly if you're on the phone or playing with, Angry Birds or whatever they do, But other than that, it's a great career if you don't mind working hard hours, because it's not an easy job. It does pay well, the benefits are good, you meet a lot of wonderful people, and it never gets boring, it's always different.